Hi, so I'm going to start speaking now. So why ASL? I'm in Hong Kong, basically nobody speaks it, or speaks it, signs it, so why would I want to learn it? Well, like many people, I've always had a fascination with languages. I download those apps on my phone to learn like Dutch, Russian, and Spanish, but to no prevail. But what about a language that you can just sign, aka sign? There's only so much an app can do. You know, you can download these dictionaries, you can download these Duolingo apps, but you can never really fully get the experience of learning a new language without going headfirst into it. Something you can't do from behind a phone screen. So, yeah. That's when sign language comes in. Since I was little, I was always interested in sign language just because I would see people walking down the street signing to each other with their friends and always wonder, what are they saying? Like, isn't it weird? So with this interest, I started practicing signs. I always wondered how all these difficult types of sign language came from. And from that, I always had a desire to learn. And with this new personal project thing that we do for the NYP, I figured, let me take advantage of this opportunity and go for it. It was a lot of trial and error, as you will see soon. But the first thing I wanted to do was my research. I wanted to learn the origin of ASL and just sign language in general and try and see what I could do. So I'm going to start talking about the history of sign language and how it kind of helped me learn where ASL came from and why I might want to learn it and why you might want to learn it. And yeah.
The origins of sign language are reported to date back to the 11th century, though it has been speculated whether or not its origins are even older than that. Science credit mankind as the first users of nonverbal languages. As before verbal languages, they needed some way to communicate with each other. Early man probably did create the first very basic version of sign language. However, there are no records of this and they cannot be confirmed. In the 11th century, monks developed signs and different signals to help communicate during a vow of silence. The main start of sign language occurred in the 1500s as Pedro Ponce de Leon, a Spanish monk, adopted and adapted these signs to help start teaching deaf students within Spain. He is the first known and recognized sign language teacher and helped create the instruction of formal sign language as we know today. This was a remarkable feat, as centuries before that, Aristotle, a famous Greek philosopher, was the first to have a claim recorded about deafness. He claimed that people can only learn through spoken language. This idea ended up having the deaf be seen as people who are unable to learn or be educated at all. Deaf people were then stripped of their fundamental rights and declared as non-persons, in some places, for a disability that they could not control. Luckily, his idea started to get proved wrong in Europe around the 14th to 17th centuries, and then people began to start changing their views towards the deaf community, and this opened up the doors to all new types of sign languages to be formed. The first ever sign language to be formed was actually in France. I'm going to butcher the pronunciation. Let's see how I do. Charles Michel de Epie, a French priest, was an early advocate and activist for deaf rights. In 1755, he created the first ever public school for the deaf called Institution Nationale des Sounds and Movements of Paris, but it's called the National Institute for Deaf Mutes in Paris. It was the first ever institution to have a system in place to properly educate deaf students, leading to him being called the father of deaf. He then combined the signs he had seen from around the country with his pre-made alphabet and created the first ever sign language dictionary. This sign language is now referred to as Old French Sign Language, and it's spread across the world, so specifically Europe and America.
Now, this was the foundation of sign language, but what formed ASL?
There is no definite history of when ASL officially started, but it is known/speculated to have spawned over 200 years ago from mixing different types of sign language, mainly LSF, or French Sign Language. During the 1800s, there were only a few thousand deaf Americans. There was no clear language. Although ASL uses the English alphabet and is taught usually in English, it has its own distinct language. It has its own grammar rules, pronunciation, word order, sentence structure, etc. 250,000 to 500,000 people consider ASL their native language, according to K International in 2018. No one form of sign language is universal. Different sign language are used for different country/regions. There's ASL, BSL, ISL, CSL, LSF, Indo-Pakistani Sign Language. There's so many all around the world. Now, what makes them different? Now, what is the difference between American Sign Language and British Sign Language, you might be asking? Well, a lot, actually. There's so much of a difference that they're not even considered in the same language family. Think about that. English, a common language, and our sign languages are totally different. The main difference that you can see from British Sign Language is that British Sign Language uses two hands, while the American Sign Language, derived from French Sign Language, also uses one hand. That is the main difference between the two that is very noticeable. It is notable to say that even though ASL, BSL, and ISL, American Sign Language, British Sign Language, and Irish Sign Language, all use English as a common factor, they're all different from each other in different ways. Mainly American Sign Language is different from the two of them, but then ISL and BSL are also different in their own ways. According to K International, anywhere from 1 million to 20 million deaf people in China use the Chinese Sign Language to communicate. It is hard to say how many deaf people actually use it in China, though, because the Chinese education system has discouraged and quote-unquote stigmatized its use. For most deaf Chinese children are treated at hearing rehabilitation centers, which only allow strict teaching with hearing to be involved. More Chinese schools for the deaf have opened up in recent years, and Chinese Sign Language is slowly gaining acceptance. The first school that was founded in China for Chinese Sign Language was by American missionaries. However, Chinese Sign Language is not related to ASL. Here are some examples of the ASL sentence structure. There are different word orders depending on your audience's knowledge of the topic or the subject. The most common one is the topic-comment structure. The topic-comment structure is a general ASL sentence that follows a topic-comment arrangement. Usually the subject is the first topic of your sentence. For example, I go to the store would be store as a subject, me go. And another structure is called OSV. For our simple ASL sentences, OSV follows basic English grammar. For example, it can be me go store instead of store me go. So another one is an and/or structure. The structure is for choosing something, like if you were to ask someone which flavor they would want. They would indicate or indicates which, so sign both choices first, and then at the end sign which, and then indicates is both. Like before, I would sign the choices first, then sign both. Some examples of sentence structures I have learned. So some examples of the use of sentence structures I have learned. Let's just say I'm going to the store to buy clothes. In a topic-comment sentence structure, it would be clothes run out, store me go buy. In an SVO sentence structure, it can't be used because it's not a simple enough sentence. An English sample sentence, another one, would be I'm going to the store to buy more chips and water. The topic-comment sentence structure would be me store go, me buy chips and water both. The SVO sentence structure is, again, too complex. So it's a little different. It's not completely complicated, but it would take some time to learn. Just like how English is a very expressive, with each person who speaks it, ASL is a very expressive language, and your dialect, age, ethnicity, and a lot of other factors can affect how other people use ASL.
Hi. I didn't film a clean transition here from what you're about to see next, so basically the next clip is of me doing my practice logs and how I practice my ASL while home, and I put subtitles of what I was learning, so maybe you can learn along. And yeah. Hi. So this is the bit where I get to actually teach you some sign language. I'm going to teach you the alphabet and some numbers. They're really fun, and if you learn just the alphabet of ASL, you can already finger speak everything. So I hope that that's one of the things you take away from this video and that you like and that you learn. Feel free to slow down the video, pause it just to practice some signs. And if you ever see me in school, come up to me and do some sign with me and I'll respond back. So yeah, I hope you enjoy and thank you.
Well, I hope you learned something from this video, whether it was some of the alphabet, some numbers, or even some facts about the history of sign language, like Aristotle being a total jerk to deaf people.